I'd like to welcome you to this set of tutorials on the use of nonlinear phonology in the analysis of speech data for purposes of clinical intervention. A number of students and clinicians are here to walk you through some of the process and to give you some ideas for therapy. The therapy ideas are a little bit more fun than the analysis, but we encourage you to walk through the tutorial. We hope it will be of use. And outside of UBC, I like to do a lot of dancing and singing. You might hear that again in this tutorial introduction. Hello, and welcome to the webinar or tutorial, Clinical Application of Constraints-Based Nonlinear Phonology, put together by myself, May Bernhardt, and Joseph Stemberger at the University of British Columbia. We would like to dedicate this tutorial to our family members, in particular my maternal grandmother, Florence May Parker, originally of Margate in the UK, for her profound love of children, which has inspired me all my life. To our parents, Lou and Peggy Hanford, and Bridget and Tony Stemberger, for their love, support, and strong work ethic that's kept us going all these years. And most importantly, our ever-inspiring next generations, Travis, Carmina, Gwendolyn, Morgan, Larissa, and new one on the block, Remy. I'd like to also give a sincere thank you to the research assistants across many countries in this cross-linguistic study and our awesome filmmaker, Rina Soberanes. Plus, of course, the funding bodies in many countries, and in particular, the funding bodies in Canada, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and several British Columbia and UBC foundations and grants. So what's in the tutorial? We're going to define what we mean by protracted phonological development, give you an overview of theories and analyses, what kind of general methods, what to analyze, talk about clinical application research that we've done and others have done, and then present, most importantly, the scan analysis tutorial page by page for English. In addition, in this whole set of tutorials, there'll be a multisyllabic word analysis by Glenda Mason, PhD student at UBC, a set of phonological activities in English and Spanish, and a French webinar by Dr. Daniel Bailey. So what do we mean by protracted phonological development? We mean simply that phonological or speech development happens over an extended or protracted period of time. The term speech sound disorders is currently more in vogue in common, but focuses attention on speech sounds rather than all of the parts of speech and its structure, and uses the negative term disorders. We prefer a term that has a positive connotation. We don't know if the person will develop the speech that's typical of their target area, but we'd like to give them the hope that they could. Why does protracted phonological development occur? It can arise because of challenges in one or more of the representation of phonetic form, whether speech or sign, the processing of that form, or the actual articulation of that form. It's demonstrated by speech or sign that's difficult to understand for the client's age and sociolinguistic group. There may also be, or instead of speech, there may be phonological awareness or literacy challenges. Let's look a little bit at the theories that underlie this presentation. First of all, the phonological hierarchy. And from the top at the prosodic phrase level to the bottom where the tiny features of each of the speech sounds are found. How much fun is there in phonology? I say from the phrase to the feature and many places in between. Phonology is more than a stream of sounds. First analogy you might think about, if you haven't considered this before, is a music score. We notice here in a concerto that melodies run in parallel. Time, rhythm, synchronizes the melodies. All together, they create the concerto. Without many lines and time synchronization, there would be no concerto. The featured instrument and the orchestra follow the same path, but separately. Another analogy, we know that a house requires a framing, a structure to hold it up. Doors, windows, paint, Furniture are details or specific smaller units within the structure that must exist, whether it's a tent or a lean-to or a full-scale castle. What about consonants and vowels? These are not just indivisible speech sounds as they once were thought to be, but rather assemblies of independent characteristics or features. We could take a third analogy from physics. We see matter, it looks solid, the table looks like it's solid, but people tell us it's made up of molecules, which are made up of atoms, which are made up of subparticles, which really in the end are just energy. So everything is made of other things and are glommed together in some way to make what we see as a reality, as an object in space. So what are the kinds of features of consonants and vowels? There can be features of manner, how a sound is produced, place, where the sound is produced, and in what way the larynx is involved. How are the vocal folds? Are they spread? Are they closed? Are they vibrating? Are they not vibrating? So all of these are the features that apply to both consonants and vowels. Here we see a hierarchy of features. We could see that the manner features are gathered together in what's called a root, which is another word for the phoneme itself. All of the things grouped together there at the top. Attached to that are the laryngeal features, spread glottis, constricted glottis, and voice, and the place features, which could be labial with the lips, coronal with the tip and blade of the tongue, dorsal with the back of the tongue, radical with the pharyngeal part of the mechanism. And those again are subdivided into round and unround, labial, labial-dental, anterior plus and minus, distributed plus and minus, groove plus and minus, and so on. You can read a lot more about the features and the theories in the workbook, which is attached to this tutorial as a free download. Another theory that we've been working with for some years now is based on constraints. Speaking is in essence a competition between our can-dos and our can't-dos. In the literature of linguistics, that would be expressed as faithfulness versus markedness constraints. Optimality theory has given us the notion that constraints are relative. There are degrees of possible and impossible, i.e., constraints are ranked with respect to one another. What does that mean in terms of what we used to think about phonology, in terms of rules or processes? Well, it turns out, if we think about it, many rules or processes can resolve one set of constraints. For example, the adult target might be tip, but the child or the other adult can't do t followed by p. There is a coronal labial sequence constraint that's negative. However, on the positive side, the person can say p and t individually, can do sequences of p, t, and k, p, and must use all the time word initial consonants. Optionally, the person could use word final consonants, but doesn't have to. So what could happen here? What kind of processes or rules could resolve this set of constraints on the sequence of coronolabial? Some options might be: get rid of the end. If you get rid of the P, you don't have it anymore, so deletion is one option. You could assimilate. If you have two P's, then you don't have a sequence, so you might do an assimilation. You could change the order. You could put the P in front of the T, and that would solve the problem. Or you could substitute something for the T, make a K out of it, and then you've avoided the sequence constraint. Which option do you choose? Well, that depends on the relative acceptability of the various options in your system. At any given point, a person may decide to go one way or the other with this. And across people, we'll see differences. Even across words within one person, we may see differences. How does this relate to our treatment? Treating a process may, but may not, resolve a negative constraint. For example, the person may decide, well, I'm not going to delete the P anymore. That may vanish. But what if I was to do an assimilation and just say pip instead of tip? That would be okay. Well, would it? Constraints approach uses the positive to defeat the negative. So an option for the tip sequence constraint for therapy, what can the person do? Well, they can say T, the letter T, name. They can say U, and they can say P. So you could have them say T, U, P. And then they could leave out the U and just say T, P. Then after that became comfortable, they could turn that into a word, T, P. And then you have something that you can draw a picture of or get inside or create out of blankets and sticks. After a little bit of time saying T, P slowly, you might be able to put it together, T, P, and all of a sudden, you're in 2 syllables, but you have a T followed by a P. After a while, you might think, well, let's see if I can be sneaky and get rid of the final E sound. And so you might go T, and before the E sounds, you stop your lips. So then you have teep. Well, that's not a word in English, but it could be a nonsense character that likes to live in the teepee. And from there, you can get to tip because, as we know, E is the tense vowel, E is the lax vowel. Same thing, just a little difference in tongue height and tension. So let's say a little bit more about the sources of constraints versus processes. Process really is a need-based analysis. It's the result of constraint rankings. Constraints, however, link to the underlying capacity and resources of the person in terms of their cognition, their ability to remember, to attend, to process, their anatomy and physiology, whether their tongue and their larynx and everything is ready for that kind of speech, sound, or structure, their perception, auditorily, visually, tactile, kinesthetically, and their input from the environment. Have they actually heard these words sufficiently? So constraints talks about the strengths that the person has, the positive and the negative, the needs, puts them both together. What are the clinical implications of these theories? We see here brightly, boldly, consider all levels as goals or supports. Constraints, exploit the positive to defeat the negative. Hierarchy, here it is again. I do not want to underemphasize this. Consider all the levels as goals or supports, needs or helps. And what about the fact that the levels are a bit independent from one another? Address new structure with old features and vice versa. So let's review this slide again because it is an important slide. The implications clinically of constraints. Exploit the positive to defeat the negative. Hierarchy. Consider all levels as goals or supports. Independent levels. Address new structure with old features and vice versa. Let's now turn to developmental analysis and general methods that we might use. What are we going to analyze? Client pronunciations compared with the targets of the dialect, either from a single word test or a connected speech sample, maybe narrative, maybe play-based, depending on the age and abilities of the person. Generally, a basic list of 45 to 50 words gives you a good start, and then you can supplement that to match the client's needs. We've discovered that for English phonology, 85 to 100 words gives us a pretty good idea. And for some languages, you may need a little bit less because of simpler phonologies, in some languages a little bit more. We want to look at the phonemes of the language and the sequences or clusters of the language across word positions at various word lengths and stress pattern types, including, may I add and emphasize, multisyllabic words. May not be something you want to get from a 2-year-old, but you certainly want to start getting those from 4-year-olds and up. So we can analyze the data in 2 ways, in essence. We can look at what the person does themselves, the forms they use, and we give minimal importance here to the targets of the language. And then we summarize that system in terms of the presence and absence of forms for various levels of the phonological hierarchy. So this is, what does the person do? We know we might be thinking a little bit about the language target, but we're mostly focused on what do they do. And then there's the relational part where we definitely compare them with the language targets. So we look at their match proportions with language targets on any parameter of interest. How do they match the word structures, the segments, the features? And then we would like to know what kind of mismatch or error patterns they have compared with the language targets. And how does that fit with positive things and negative constraints? And some people are comfortable with using processes or rules, and they might want to describe things that way as well. So should we just look at the data in a qualitative way, or should we count things? Well, we are providing a tutorial on the scan form that we use for English and have adapted for the 15 languages now that organize the data for us. It's great, however, to support your scan with counts for certain parameters at least. Why? Well, in clinical service these days, you need to be able to document that you are making a difference to people. So you have to have baselines of the numbers of things that they can do when they come in to see you, and you need to document the change. Now, you don't need to count everything that exists, but perhaps a few key things that will tell your employer and the families and the government agencies that you're making a difference. And when do you really need to count? Well, you need to count if you need to prove your service is good. But also for the client, some things you can see. They do it all right, so why would I count something that's 100% accurate? Or they don't do it at all, so that's 0%. I don't need to count that, I can see it. But if there's inconsistency, and some of the time they do it, and some of the time they don't do it, I'd kind of like to know how much. So that when I try to say there's an improvement, I can say, well, they went from 20% correct to 70% correct. So I've made a difference. And what do I want to count? Well, any parameter of interest, really, that might be useful in the clinical program. And how do I do this? Well, I can count them by hand. It's not too bad if I only have 40 utterances. But if I start having 85 to 100, I certainly want my computer to help me. And we have computer programs, Fawn and Capes, plus many others that are available. But the free ones are downloadable from the web for Fawn, for any language, aids with transcription and analysis. And through our university, we've created a free blog to help you with some of that, from Ruth Hansen, who did that in 2013. And now available free from myself or Julie Masterson is the Computerized Articulation and Phonology Evaluation System, which is a program for PC Windows application and is available free from us. We have hope to distribute that as you request over the next little while. So more information is provided, as I said, in the Bernhardt and Stemberger workbook available free on this website. What to analyze? Well, here we go. Word structure, you'll see that on page 3 of the scan. Word length and syllables. The feet, 1 or 2 feet per word. Are they left prominent, center prominent, or right prominent? Where's the stress? Some stress patterns, such as strong, weak in a word like happy, weak, strong in a word like balloon, or strong secondary in a word like doghouse. And then finally word shape in what we call CV timing units, consonant, vowel, consonant, and so on. And there'll be more information for you when you hear page 3 described. Here's some examples of word shapes in English. CVV, by or be with a long vowel. CVC, bit. CVVC, bike or bead, and so on. Optionally, you might be interested in a theory of moras or timing units that talks about the time a segment has, in particular in the nucleus and rhyme of the word. Some words, the child might have a target of CVC but produces CVV. That suggests the child wants to maintain the moras of the word. The structure's present, even if the features are mismatches. You might also be interested in terms like onsets, nuclei, and rhymes, the onset being the syllable initial consonants, the rhyme the nucleus or the nucleus plus coda, the nucleus the head of the syllable, usually a vowel, and the coda, the syllable final consonant. Some of these words are in the literature. You might like using those. What about the consonants and vowels? Well, you definitely want to pay attention to word position, and you can find that on pages 4 and 6 in the scan analysis form. And the vowels and features, you're very interested in knowing the difference between stressed and unstressed syllables and how the child uses or doesn't use vowel features according to that parameter. And page 7, if you need to analyze vowels, is provided in the scan analysis form. Okay, why do we carry on with this? It started in 1988 for me, and it's still going, and we're in 2014. Well, interestingly, it didn't start with me. It started in 1984. Is that date relevant? Some of you might have read a book called 1984. And now we know what it really meant. Motivating studies for my research, which has resulted in this tutorial coming in 2014. I shared a room with Wendy Sandler, who was a linguist studying American Sign Language. She showed that nonlinear phonology could be a really effective way of describing what was happening in alternations in American Sign Language. I thought, wow, that's interesting. You can use nonlinear phonology to describe how signs change in different contexts. That was so interesting to me. I thought, I wonder if anybody's done that for speech, and particularly for people with protracted speech development. Well, it turns out Andrew Spencer, a linguist in Britain, had been challenged to do that, and he created a functional and effective nonlinear analysis of phonological disability in a child called Rosie. And his concluding statement in his very, very nice paper was, the repercussions for diagnosis and treatment of phonological disability are self-evident. And I sat there thinking, they're not exactly self-evident to me at this point, but that's a challenge that I'm going to take up. And so it was that sentence that started me on the path to my dissertation, and which was completed in 1990 with 6 children who had phonological difficulties of fairly severe nature. And you can get that through the web from the University of British Columbia. And selected references that are in published literature are presented at the end of this introduction if you want to download them from your websites. So then I thought, well, what if it was just me and I was doing my best? It was my dissertation. I was dancing up and down the room and growing plants in the room and having so much fun with the children and getting their parents involved, and we were all completely immersed in this phonological intervention program. What if it was just me and it had nothing to do with theories? So I thought, well, then we need to take it elsewhere. So for the 1990s, we basically did a whole raft of studies with a large number of children with moderate to severely protracted phonological development in community clinics across British Columbia, usually 1 child per SLP bought out from their therapy services. They got 16 to 18 weeks of individual therapy with parent support. We focused specifically on the levels of phonological hierarchy, so word structure on the one hand and segments features on the other, as independent parts of a 3-cycle or 3-block program. We use strengths at one level of their system to address needs at another. And we created activities for awareness and production, applying theories of structure, including Mora theory, and features. And what did we find? In my original dissertation and in these subsequent studies, we found that children made faster gains than previously reported for some of these same children. Families liked hearing about their child's strengths, not just about what they couldn't do. Clinicians learned the approach, even if they hadn't had much background in theory, and created a lot of fun. Children who had clinicians with undergraduate linguistics had faster progress, showing that it is important to study these theories and learn analysis. We found that word structure changed faster than speech sounds, and those changes had a greater impact on intelligibility and the phonological systems of the children. Segmental changes caught up over time, and were not always the ones that we might expect developmentally. So some children learned liquids when they still didn't have all of their stops down pat. So, should we use a form, or what should we do for analysis? The tutorial describes one form that we've been developing over the years for analysis. A different form may work for you and your clients. The key point is to analyze phonological data at multiple levels of the hierarchy. You might say, well, I don't need to do that. My client only has an S problem or an R problem. However, even a client with only an S or R problem may show differences according to context. There may be differences in word position, in feet or syllable prominence, in the sequences, whether they're in clusters, whether they're next to certain kinds of vowels. So we always have to make reference to structure, even if we're not having to address structure per se. And I'd like to make this comment again: phonology is more than a sequence of sounds. What's next in the tutorial? A page-by-page description of a boy we call Craig's scan analysis. Stephanie and Val present the preview, page 2. Jeff and Stephanie with an F. Page 3, word structure. Segmental inventory, page 4, Jeff and Val. Page 5, sequences by Megan and Dave, and feature mismatch patterns by the same two. Vowels by Stephanie F. and Stephanie PH. And finally, we all get together to discuss the summary and our selection of goals for Craig. We then go a little bit crazy and provide you with some activities that we might have done if this were Craig today and we were doing the therapy. The rest of this little introduction gives you some references.